absolutely what I did was wrong. My morals have changed, and I would not do it again today if I had the same opportunity, and I've learned a lot from my mistakes.
The Interview by PokerOrg.
Welcome to PokerOrg's The Interview. This week I have Justin Bonomo. Justin's been a force to be reckoned with on the tournament circuit for probably about 20 years. He sits at number 2 on the all-time career money list with actually $63 million. Now, I first heard about Justin when he wrote a blog under Z Justin, his online name at the time. And I said, this guy's going to go far. He was very articulate. I learned a lot from him, and I've watched his career ever since. I even wrote a cover article with Justin, which we'll talk about for Card Player magazine. And we've worked together a few times over the years, different features for the magazine. And Justin's grown a lot during that time, as we all have. And we want to have a chance today to spend some time with him and learn where he's been at, what's been going on, and talk about everything poker and everything that's going on with his life. I conceive the Interview podcast as an opportunity to delve deeper into the personalities, the viewpoints, mindset, and diverse strategies from the very best in the game. It's not just a 60-second soundbite where we can hear it from the WSOP events. I reached out to Justin to understand him better and to discuss some of the emotional, political atmosphere and horrific things that he's been reading about and expressing in his Twitter account, and to understand how that affects his poker and his poker life, his daily life. Let's get into it. Welcome, Justin.
Thanks for having me, Craig. Looking forward to it.
No, me too. It's been a while, man.
Yeah, it has.
I'll catch up with you now and then, but you've been a busy man. And back when we did that article, you had $7 million in earnings. Can you believe that?
Yeah, different time. Those numbers meant different things back then, for sure.
Sure. So what's going on with you right now? How are you? You're at your home in Canada, is that correct? Or
Yeah, I split my time between Vancouver and Vegas. Vancouver is like the place that I want to make my home. I'm in the process so I've already submitted an application for permanent residency, but everything's backed up for COVID because it could take years.
Really?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
And of course, I keep a place in Vegas because I spend so much time there. It's actually just cheaper than getting a hotel every time.
I figured. And you've been in the headlines. Let's just jump right into it. You've been in the headlines lately, and mostly not about poker. Let's acknowledge, I was going to say, I talked to the editor. I said, let's save that till the end of the interview. He said, no, let's jump into it, Craig. Let's talk about where Justin's at. There's a lot to talk about today, and I'm looking forward to it. So we can acknowledge the elephant in the room. Let's talk about Twitter. As a poker player, you're one of the best in determining EV spots. Your political tweets seem to alienate a lot of people in the poker world. Is Twitter, the X account, the right place to change their mind? How do you feel about that and what you're sharing?
Yeah, there's this misconception that the goal is always about changing people's minds, and that's not really it. If you ever talk to someone who's in political activism, they'll tell you whether you're going door to door campaigning for someone, your goal is to mobilize people who are on the same side as you. So I went knocking on doors for Jackie Rosen, for example. We didn't waste our time trying to convince anyone. We were just letting everyone know when voting day was. We were helping them figure out ways that they could get to vote, telling them basic information like that, because that's what's effective, getting more people to vote, for example. Mm-hmm. And the same thing holds true for Palestine. There will always be some Zionists who are not open to anything you have to say, but kind of educating people about the rallies, books that they can read, the importance of speaking out on social media, the boycotts. Just getting people to do anything that they can do to help support the cause.
Well, maybe it was back during the summer you did a Triton event. You mentioned that you didn't have an invite yet to one of the events. How is all this out, not just what's going on now, but throughout your career, you've always been honest and straightforward and outspoken. How has this affected you in the events, in being invited to events, or maybe people at the table challenging you? How has this been your experience during these tournaments? And you know what I mean, the feedback you're getting from the players.
Yeah, I mean, I take the blame for the Triton thing. The reason I didn't get an invite is because I didn't really try. I kind of took it for granted that I could just fly to Monte Carlo and people would be lining up to invite me. And what's really going on in the metagame behind that is that all the other pros, they've built all these text message lists. So every time one of these invitational comes out, they text message 20 recreational players to try to get an invite. Or they have like a solid one that they've been using for a couple years now. And I just haven't been putting in the effort to play that game, like kind of managing context, sucking up to people, like begging for invites. It's just not my favorite thing to do. It's not really my style.
Mhm.
And sure, definitely my beliefs have alienated me with some people, but they've also made me more popular with other people. So I certainly don't want to make it out to seem like my beliefs are why I'm not getting invited.
Right. So how do you choose to play in these tournaments? You mentioned that you work so hard and study during the games at night after you play. How do you choose which events you play and not play at this point in your career?
Yeah, I've got my eye on the biggest ones each year. For example, the Super High Roller Bowl. Um, and there's so many high rollers that I just can't play everything.
Mhm.
So when it comes to Triton events, they have some of the best tournaments. I like to make as many as I can. Um, a big part of it just comes down to when I'm burned out. So for the past 4 months, I've been going pretty hard, playing lots of tournaments, not taking many breaks. And yeah, I'm at the point where I'm just burned out and I need at least a few weeks off. So I'm probably going to skip Triton Jeju, which is coming up in early March.
Mhm.
Maybe if the next 2 weeks off make me feel re-energized, I'll make a last minute plan to go there. But for now, I'm just planning on taking a little bit of time off.
How do you deal with some of the constant abuse that's on Twitter or wherever it may be? And have you ever thought about just shutting down? And this was a question that was offered to me from one of our editors. Have you ever thought about just shutting down your social media and focusing on poker? Or tell me more. How do you deal with this? Do you have your mental approach to it all? How you take care of yourself mentally, physically, spiritually in the midst of all this turmoil?
Yeah, it's been tempting a couple times to just delete my account. One of the things that keeps me going is anytime I take a stand, I get so many private messages of people telling me like how important it is for them to see someone like me speaking out. I get a lot of messages from people saying why they can't personally speak out. A lot of the things I'm speaking out about, people will lose their jobs for speaking out about, or become alienated, or lose friends and family.
Mm.
And it's kind of one of the ways that I use my privilege. Like even speaking out about things is that should be non-controversial, like the right to have a polyamorous relationship. In my opinion, the Palestinian thing shouldn't be controversial either. Like, don't mass murder children seems like a non-controversial thing to me. But yet people lose their jobs over it. And yet, going back to the privilege thing, I'm in a position where I won't lose any friends. I won't lose my job. It certainly has cost me a lot of money with like sponsorship deals, speaking out so much against Trump and whatnot. Um, but it's too important for me to stop. Like I can't, I wouldn't be able to sleep at night if I just didn't say anything about these atrocities.
Oh, I could tell you have a big heart and always been straightforward in your views. And recently, you became a coach on Run It Once. And Phil's always been one of my favorite players. When he started writing for another magazine, a competition to a card player at Bluff, I was like, he's the best. I really enjoyed what he had to share and his viewpoints on poker and life. And when people went after him because he hired you, which I mean, I'd want to study with you or some of the players on the list there because you're one of the best in the world, and the way you think and the way you play the game. And he was really fast to write a letter, and he caught a lot of flack for bringing you on board. I want to read something because it was kind of amazing what he wrote and then have your response. So Phil wrote on Twitter, "It is our job to hire the best poker players in the world to teach our members. We don't want to terminate people's contracts over political beliefs. I'll say exactly one thing about Justin's views. I firmly believe that he does not hate or advocate hate towards any race or religion, and this should be obvious to anyone that's followed him. Beyond that, I'm not planning to comment on Justin's views. They aren't my own, they're his. If you dislike one of those pros enough to take your business elsewhere, I respect that. I wholeheartedly support your right to vote with your wallet." How did you feel when he shared this? Because I was really moved by what he did, and I don't know. He got a lot of flack for it. At the same time, he got a lot of respect for the what he did, sharing that.
Yeah, Phil stuck his neck out for me a couple times, which has absolutely meant a lot for me.
Yeah.
Um, in this case, he's kind of riding the line between like he is saying some of these things because it's good for the business. any business with hiring so many coaches is going to have people who have a wide range of political views. So it might make sense for him as a businessman to take a neutral standpoint. Um, but him speaking out for my character does mean a lot. And let's actually go back, I don't know, 3-6 months before I even signed with Run It Once. There was a big controversy with Doug Polk. The very short version is Charlie Carroll was open about some of his child traumas,
Yeah.
really, really horrific stuff, including pedophilia. And the way that his trauma has taken him is he has the need to understand where these horrible atrocities come from. And it isn't because he wants to support the atrocities, it's because through understanding them, you can not only grow from your trauma, but you can also help prevent these atrocities from occurring in the future. And Doug completely twisted his words and his experiences around and made it seem like Charlie, a victim of pedophilia, was actually pro pedophilia,
I know.
and just said the worst, most horrible, unspeakable things about Charlie. And I called Doug a monster for it publicly, and I don't regret it. I think the things that he said were absolutely monstrous. And I was very surprised that Phil decided to stick his neck in this debate, because it's something, as a businessman, it can only cost him hits. He wrote a long thing, really admonishing and condemning Doug Polk and his words. But in there, he wrote a very nice thing about me. He said something about many of us wonder what we would have done during World War II when the Nazis were coming to power. Like, would I, Phil Galfond, have been too afraid to speak out?
Mm.
And he said he was certain that I would have had the courage to speak out. And, I think he's right about that. And I think that a lot of people don't kind of see that that's the kind of thing that I'm doing. And it just meant a lot for me to Phil to kind of take this risk where he didn't need to say that about me. He mentioned the Overton window, which is an important concept, which motivates a lot of what I say. If you picture just a spectrum of things that you could say, from horribly racist things to messages of love, often it's oriented such that you have radical left political statements on the left and radical right political statements on the right, and just like normal centrist things in the middle. And so the actual Overton window is that area in the middle that it's socially acceptable to talk about. And a big part of political activism or speaking out is the idea of moving that window. So right now in the mainstream media, it's okay to criticize Palestinians for fighting for their liberation, but it's not okay to criticize the IDF, Israeli Defense Forces, for bombing children. And I want to move that window. Like, we should absolutely be criticizing them for bombing and starving children. And same thing comes with, gay rights, for example. Basically, all the issues I speak out about, I want to move the Overton window, and just things that seem like basic common sense to me, I want them to be okay to talk about.
No, I 100% agree. I remember watching this congressional testimonial a while back, challenging some of the bigwigs at Twitter for basically censoring free speech of some of these major doctors, and Harvard doctors wanting to step up, Stanford doctors wanting to share things, but they weren't allowed to. Voices that were very clear and had information to share that could assist people, and Twitter shut it down right away. So I agree with you. Um, it's a how has this affected your mental mindset when you prepare to go play in a big tournament that's a $250,000 buy-in? What do you do daily to keep yourself balanced, both body, mind, and spirit?
It depends on the issue. For some, I'm willing to I can forget about it for a week and really focus on poker. The Palestinian genocide has hit differently, and I just haven't been able to stop thinking about it. It has very much negatively affected my play. I feel this obligation to kind of not let things slide online, and so I'm on Twitter while I'm playing these tournaments.
Wow.
And yeah, it's destroyed my focus. Another thing that happens with me is, sometimes you really want to be at the poker table. You're playing great poker. You're focused. Um, but when you're just miserable for whatever reason, you're not going to play your A game. And I've definitely been affected by that. And that's part of the reason why I'm taking some time off, because like I know my focus isn't on poker right now, and I need to kind of take care of some other things and speak out on some other things before I can fully dive back into poker. Anyone who's seen my Twitter account knows that maybe 1% of my tweets now are about poker. It just, it seems so insignificant to me. Like I kind of don't understand why people aren't speaking out against this atrocity. Like our tax dollars are being used to buy bombs to kill children, and it's crazy to me that people don't care about that.
Well, still, but we mentioned, I think you said you did meditation, you do yoga, things that you have to find balance in your life to even get through what you're sharing and doing now, because it's a horrific time. So what are your self-care routine that you do daily to share with people? That will also translate, obviously, when they play poker or just live their life as a balanced human.
Yeah, meditation has been very helpful for me, especially for poker. I used to meditate every single day. Now I generally just do it before most tournaments, but not even before every tournament. Honestly, it would probably benefit me to
For
get
sure.
a more regular meditation practice going. I find my community in Vancouver to be very nourishing. It's just people who like are all about love and connection and openness. When something happens to someone in the community, like someone just a good friend of mine just went through surgery, and it's been really wonderful just to see how many people are taking care of her while she can't take care of herself. She's actually staying with my girlfriend and her roommate right now. So many people have been popping in to take care of her. It's just really heartwarming to be part of a community like that. I had an instance about 6 months ago that was really traumatic for me, and my girlfriend just like messaged a bunch of my friends and said like, "Hey, Justin's going through this right now." And I got 30 messages, some of them video messages, just people telling me how much they love me. That kind of thing. It's just so nourishing for the soul.
Yeah, you can't. We need that in our life. I post a lot on my Instagram. It's more of a fun place than Twitter in a different way. That there's not enough kindness in the world. I'm very moved by the kindness I see when I'm driving around Los Angeles, contributing to animals, the homeless, things like that. And when you see that on Instagram or Twitter, it really moves you that we need to come from, at least I'm not telling people what to do, but have more awareness that telling someone great job or we love you today, how important that is and how that changes the soul and how it brightens up your eyes. My only advice after being a meditator for 40 years is that it's like a bank account. So the more you put in there, the more it's going to accumulate in your system and be there for you whenever. You just do it sporadically, sure, it's going to help. But if you could do it every day, even if it's only like 7 minutes a day or 3 minutes a day of sitting totally still, breathing, and most people don't even take a conscious breath during the day, as you probably know from your yoga practice. They just jump in, jump on their phone, they're off about their day. Take a few minutes, 3 minutes of stillness and breathe, and you tend to hit more green lights. You tend to have a little more fun. You tend to be more aware of things coming at you and around you when you are more conscious throughout your day. It's not easy. We have no idea all these things that are affecting us, the billboards, all the social media, all the crap that's thrown at us every day. But share with me, we talked the other day briefly, how does your yoga practice? I'm actually certified in Kundalini yoga with acro yoga. That's it, correct? You're hanging from a supported unit to, oh, no, you're doing more balancing and partner work. Is that correct?
Yeah, so there's a couple different forms of it. Acro yoga is kind of like the popular term that you might see on Instagram and stuff, though a lot of people in the community prefer calling it partner acrobatics,
Hmm.
just because the only thing that it has in common with yoga is like there are things that you could name, like positions you can name, but so it's not really that much in common. Much more similar to acrobatics. So when you first start, you learn something called L basing. So generally in acro, you have a base and a flyer. The base is generally the bigger person, but not always. The flyer is usually a smaller person. So if you want, you can picture a bigger guy and a smaller girl. Though, of course, it's not always that way. Now picture the guy lying down on his back with his legs straight up in the air. So he's in like an L shape. And then the girl will, or the flyer will put her hips on his feet and he'll lift her up in the air. And that's called bird. You can look up acro yoga bird to get a picture of it. That's like the most basic first thing you learn. And that's what I did for the first like 2 years or so that I was doing acro. Then as you get more advanced, there are other forms. So I've been doing a lot of standing acro, which is definitely more difficult, requires a lot more strength. So there's one skill, I'll be standing up, and the goal, it's called hand to hand. The goal, I'll have my hands like this, and the goal is to have the flyer above me in a straight line. Her hands are on my hands, and she's doing a handstand on my hands with her legs like straight up in the air. So yeah, there's a wide range of things you can do. There's something called pops or Icarian, where you're kind of like tossing them in the air. Lots of different forms of it.
How does this translate into more balance? I know from my practices that all these kind of practice from doing qigong, martial arts, things like that. How does this translate into balance in your life mentally, and also how you carry it into your poker game?
Yeah. So my favorite thing about acro is it's the exact opposite of poker in every way you can imagine. Instead of competing against people, you're working with them. Instead of being quiet and introverted, like you have to communicate with people. Instead of hiding your emotions, it's really important that you're like upfront about like, does this hurt? Are you happy? Is it going well? You get to move around a lot, so it's great for my body. In the summer, we're outdoors for hours and hours on end, getting sunshine. It's just such a wonderful, healthy practice, and I love it.
Right. Do you go to the gym too? Or
Yeah. So the way the weather kind of works out in Vancouver is, for the 6 months where it's cold, we do a lot more indoors. Today's actually Thursday, and every Thursday night we rent out a circus school nearby, and we'll do some training there. They have like lines hanging from the ceiling, so you can kind of tie yourself in. It's almost like rock climbing, where you can like, I don't know the terminology, belaying ropes, whatever it is.
right.
So that if you're doing like a really high stunt where you're 15 feet in the air, and instead of falling to the ground, the rope kind of catches you. So it's a really safe way to practice a lot of this stuff.
No, I came to LA to pursue my acting career after selling a business in New York. And I happened to land in a class where a Sikh, which I knew nothing, I don't even remember seeing Sikhs in New York City, was teaching the class. He was a very powerful individual, just had this presence about him, 6'4", and just an amazing physique. And he was a great teacher. And he said, "Hey, Craig, why don't you I'm also a yoga teacher, come to my class." So I went to the class, and it really enriched my life. I eventually ended up getting certified in teaching Kundalini. I don't know if you've ever practiced Kundalini, but
No.
Hatha's he used to say, Hatha's like taking the stairs, Kundalini is like taking the elevator, because you're using movements along with your breath to move energy in your body. So it's really enriched my life when I take time to practice. Got a few more, lots of stuff to talk to you about. So you brought up the Charlie situation, because I know I stuck my nose in that too, just to be positive. I'm hoping to be the best positive force in poker that I can be. I stuck my nose in there because I agreed with you and sympathized with what Charlie was going through. But when they come out and attack you about being a cheater, it bothers me, because I started around the time this all happened. I wrote the cover story on you for Card Player Magazine 10 years ago, and we talked a little bit about this. And I wanted to share a couple of things from that. Maybe you set people up, and it was that you were caught. There were many other people doing it; they just weren't caught using more than one account in tournaments at PokerStars. That's correct, right?
Um, yeah, mostly party poker, a little bit on PokerStars.
Okay.
Yeah, it's hard for me to talk about this because I'm torn in two directions. Like, one, absolutely what I did was wrong. My morals have changed, and I would not do it again today if I had the same opportunity, and I've learned a lot from my mistakes. At the same time, I think a lot of people don't understand that it was incredibly commonplace. It wasn't actually against the rules back then. The community standards were very different. So I don't think it's at all comparable to multi-accounting today.
Right.
But I still do think what I did was wrong, and I absolutely do regret it.
Talk a bit about this, the polyamorous. So is this day? I mean, you mentioned in our pre-interview we talked about it, and I've dated two women at the same time, but it was basically being romantic with two women, committed to two women at the same time, and don't see how that's that controversial. We've all dated a few women at the same time, and women dated a few men. So tell me a little bit more about it. I really don't know much about it at all in the way you're approaching it.
Yeah, I mean, in short, polyamory just means many loves or multiple loves. And it's the idea that monogamy doesn't have to be like the one and only way we lead our relationships.
Mm.
And one of my favorite things about polyamory is that people can just figure out like what works for them. For example, I'm constantly on the road and I want my partners to be able to get their needs met when I'm traveling. That's one of the appeals to me. Um, but really, there's no one model for it. Some people love the idea of a triad where it's like two men and two women or whatever. Or sorry, two women and two men is like the one that gets, it's the sexiest on Instagram. So people love to fantasize about that.
Right.
To me, it's more about just having like a big, open, supportive, loving community. I love the idea of my partners being friends with each other and having, a shared support network. Um, so I'm kind of rambling at this point.
No, no. I think I heard it first. Aubrey Marcus may have. He's got a great podcast. The former owner of On It. I talked about something similar. I was just curious. It's so. How did you find it different than delving deeper into one relationship? Are you distracted at all? Because I've always like, okay, I'll just state if you find one woman that you're or one partner that you're most attracted to and vibe with each other heart to heart, and you can go really deep. Does it digress having had two of those relationships? So tell me the benefits that you've experienced from doing something like that.
So love is not a finite resource,
Mm.
but time is. Time management is one of the problems that people run into when they're first trying polyamory, and it's a big deal. Um, I've been polyamorous for over 10 years now, and actually almost exactly 10 years now. And it's been more common for me that I've only had one partner while my partner has had two partners for a lot of my relationships. And that's just because, I'm traveling around, I'm so busy. I might have like casual hookups in whatever city I'm traveling to. Um, I do currently have two. Um, it's hard to kind of come up with the labels, but let's say two relationships that I'm like, putting effort into and continuing. One girl who I've dated for almost 4 years now, and we have something very special, very committed. We do so much together. And a newer relationship that's only been going on since October, but we're both super stoked on each other. Things are great when we spend time together.
Yeah.
And then I also do have some casual long distance relationships as well. One thing I do believe in is, for me personally, I prefer the non-hierarchical form of polyamory. So hierarchy would mean like if you have one primary partner and they have, say, veto power over your other
Mm.
relationships. But for me, it's important that all of my relationships, whether it's someone I'm meeting for the first time or someone who I've known for years, to just have the chance to organically grow into whatever makes sense.
Mm.
And now that doesn't mean that, some girl I go out on a first date with on Tinder will be as important to me as someone who I've been dating for 4 years. But what is important is that that has a chance to kind of grow on its own volition to be whatever it can be.
Right. Very interesting. For the first probably 17 years of my career in poker, besides playing a lot here in Los Angeles, I've written about strategy. So I'm going to take you a different route. Have you ever had, since we talk about mindset, how important your mental state is? I even have some of the mental books from Elliot behind me. But tell me about your study habits, because I read maybe it's recently that you talked about that when you play in tournaments, like we talked about earlier, you go there, you play for 12 hours, and you go back to your room and study for 4 hours. That's crazy. where I talked to another top pro this morning, and he goes, most of us go back and watch football or something. So, to have a break. So tell me, I'm really curious. Maybe we talked about this years ago about your study habits that brought you a lot of your success. What do you think's been the best thing for you, and what do you recommend other people to achieve some of their goals in poker?
So I actually very much do not recommend my study habits to other people. For the first 10 years of my career, I was just super obsessed with poker. All my friends were poker players. We talked about it all the time. And when that's the case, it's just so easy. Like, you don't have to think about spending time about poker because you just are spending all your time about poker.
Right.
Um, about roughly 10 years ago, I put a lot more effort into focusing on having a non-poker life. So since then, it's been a bit more of a struggle since I'm not devoting all of my time into poker. Really, the truth is, if you want to be successful, just be obsessive and devote all your time into it, and don't worry about health and balance and all that stuff. It's always a trade-off. Nowadays, I've always been kind of like an out of sight, out of mind kind of person, and also an obsessive person too. So when I'm playing these tournaments, I'll play for 10 hours, go back to my hotel room. I have 6 hands written down where, what was my check raise frequency supposed to be on this flop? Was I supposed to call the river with this hand? And I'll just do, deep dives into that, study both before and after play. But then after 2 weeks of playing tournaments all day, I'll come back home and I'll just want to spend all my time with my friends. And I just won't think about poker that much. Yeah, again, that is not my advice for success. I think if you do want to succeed at poker, doing at least a little bit of something every day would be much more productive than the way that I approach it. But part of my philosophy is that I'm kind of at the end of my career. If you're building a startup or building anything, you need to kind of be obsessive about it and go all in. And it's now more important for me to focus on just balance and all the stuff that's going to be in my life even after poker.
Right. So, can you share some of the evolution of your game as you studied? And I don't know if a lot of people know. I know that you played high stakes cash. You learned a lot from Ike Haxton. You talked about that in the article and praised him as a mentor and a friend at that time, including Scott Seaver. You guys would hang out and talk poker. And you were playing high stakes cash. You were studying the game and learning from Ike. And you actually did a challenge with Isildur One. I don't know if people remember that. And you lost, I think. You said that was the biggest downswing. But what were you studying at that time with Ike and learning? And now you guys have evolved into using solvers and things like that, not available back then. Can you share a little bit about that evolution of your game and your relationship with Ike, who I consider one of the best players in the world, along with you guys? So,
Yeah. So when I first got into poker, I got kind of thrust to the top very quickly. When I was 19, I became the first teenager ever to make a televised final table. Nowadays, it's super common to have teenagers doing it, but back then, it was kind of groundbreaking. And I would show up to a tournament like the Bahamas, and it kind of sounds immature for me to say this, but in a lot of ways, poker's kind of cliquish, and everyone wanted to be my friend. And so naturally, I just made friends with all the other best poker players, and we all learned so much from each other. Some of the early guys I was friends with, Ozzy 87, Mr. Smokey 1, Steve Bilirakis, Steve Weinstein, aka Thor Lawton. So many names. Brandon Schaefer, Carl Olson, Alex Jacob.
oh yeah.
The 2+2 forums. And I took the approach of just kind of like talking to everyone and, learning a little bit from everyone. And I was a social butterfly back then, so I would hang out with like all kinds of different groups of poker players, really just learning as much as I could. And then it was roughly 2007, 2008, excuse me, when I moved into Panorama Towers at the same time as Isaac Haxton and Scott Seaver. And, I learned a lot from all these different players, but like none of them perfectly clicked with the way that I thought about poker. And as soon as I met Isaac Haxton, like the way he talked about the game, it was like, this is what I've been looking for. this is the, the yin to my yang that kind of completes my understanding of poker. Um, and he was brilliant, so it was a pleasure to be able to learn from him. I've certainly learned far more from him than any other poker player. And I kind of stopped the approach of like meeting as many people as possible, and I just like spent as much time learning from Isaac as I could. And I like to think that Isaac's learned a lot from me as well. After maybe about a year of living Panorama Towers with him, I learned Heads Up from him, and it was just like a couple things that I was missing. Understanding that your button open frequency needs to be really high, especially when your opponent is really tight from the big blind, and kind of understanding the basic math from that. But really what it was a game theoretically optimal form of thinking. He thought about equilibriums. It wasn't just, back in 2004, it was a lot of thoughts of like, here's the mistake everyone's making, so let's do this to take advantage of it. But Isaac was kind of thinking of it in the next level of like, what should the game actually look like at a higher level? What is an unexploitable strategy? As well as like really optimizing, exploiting the mistakes his opponents were making. And yeah, so it was a lot of like poker tracker work, looking at the numbers, doing basic math, analyzing how our opponents played. And of course, everything changed in 2016 when PO Solver came out. Sometimes studying kind of feels like work, but when PO Solver came out for me, it felt like Christmas. Just like all these questions we had for years, like, okay, Jungle Man is check raising like a maniac from the big blind. Is that actually correct? And all of a sudden we got to look it up and be like, oh, he actually was correct. And you can even check raise a little more than the 22% or whatever he was check raising in certain spots. Then when like multi-way stuff came out, it was like, are we right to raise Jack 10 off from the hijack? And like with an ante, like, yeah, it is a good raise. And just like all these questions we had for years, like finally being able to get an answer for it was just, yeah, it felt like Christmas.
Well, another pro asked me, ask him something that what I just said a little bit earlier, that he likes to play during the day and then he'd rather watch MMA at night. The greats, we all know about Kobe, would show up to practice early. He'd be the last one to leave, right? I'd see him in the gym at Gold's Gym here in Venice sometimes. He's just 24/7. He said, what I learned from Justin, and he said, I can't do that, is that your joy for studying. He didn't love, it wasn't Christmas for him, it was work. How did you find, sounds like you were opening these little presents you had, like Solver tell me this and this, that I was right or we were wrong. Explain, I heard in your voice the joy of studying too. That seems to be maybe one of your major assets that you achieved to rise to the top so fast.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was definitely different back then than it is now, because we didn't have that many ways of studying. When I first started playing when I was 17, 18, I read all the books I could get my hands on, but like,
yeah,
you can only learn so much from poker books, unfortunately. And so, I was dying for more information because there just wasn't that much information out there. And, I would download things like Stocks EV, Poker Stove, Card Runners EV, like whatever program I could to learn from. Really, what I had was curiosity. Like, I just wanted to know. I would see these situations in poker and it's like, oh, yeah, I have my guess if I should do this. But like, I really wanted to understand the situation, what the equilibrium looks like at the highest level. And yeah, so when PO Solver came out, I didn't have to do anything to convince myself to do the work because I was intensely curious. And now it's a little bit different because now it's not this like groundbreaking new thing. Now it's like, who's going to spend the 4 hours a day studying every single day? And it does feel a little bit more like work to me. It's not that often that like new stuff is coming out anymore. And I also don't love a lot of the ICM sims because I kind of think that they're all trash, if I'm being perfectly honest. ICM is kind of a completely arbitrary concept that people talk about like it's a real game theory thing, but it's not. It's just a formula that has no real basis in game theory. Once we actually fully solve tournament play or come up with a better formula, I imagine that will pique my curiosity again. But I'm definitely going through a phase right now where I do have trouble putting the hours in. Yeah.
Maybe more meditation. I don't know. But no, now you brought up something. I read some of your interview or Q&A you did for Run It Once, and you talked about AI. So possibly in the future, live poker could be dead because you'll have a little implant right here. So you might get real-time assistance in real time, no matter where you play, correct? Talk a little bit about your investigation into those kind of neural links and where you see poker going. Because it's fascinating, at the same time, kind of sad if poker is going to die because you can just think about it and know the answers.
Yeah, so I like to go through some of my like old blogs and interviews and stuff, and I found one a while back where I think I was 19 years old, and I talked about how I made the decision to drop out of college because I was making $300 an hour playing sit and goes, and I knew the easy money wouldn't last forever.
Hmm.
And I'm really proud of the foresight that I had, the work ethic that I had to take advantage of that. And I also had foresight about AI. I knew that poker would eventually go the way of chess, where you can't just play a high stakes game online because you never know when they're going to be assisted by a bot. And a lot of players make the mistake of thinking that that's only online poker and it's not going to be live. Um, Most people have heard of Elon Musk's Neuralink technology, where you have that chip that you implant in your brain. What a lot of people don't realize is that this is not a new technology. It was roughly 20 or 25 years ago that the first human was able to control a computer mouse using their brain. And this is, it's technology primarily used for disabled patients so that they can communicate multiple decades ago. And so, like, it's only a matter of time before we perfect this. And it's something that, like, every single human has. We saw how quickly smartphone technology took over the world. Anyone who can afford one now has a smartphone everywhere they go. And I think within 10 or 15 years, we're going to get to the point where you don't even need your hands to Google search something anymore. You can just think, what's the weather going to be like tomorrow? And the answer just appears in your head because you have that chip in your brain. And actually, we're starting to see all those glasses that people are walking around with. I think there's an Apple and a Meta product.
Ray-Ban, all kinds, yeah.
Yeah. And that's, I haven't used it yet, but I imagine you can overlay, a map for your directions or what the weather is or your chat conversation. It doesn't take much to go from that technology to small glasses frames like yours or even contact lenses. And then, yeah, just like Neuralink, eventually you won't even be able to see the technology.
Yeah, I've seen those crazy videos on Instagram. People getting out of the car, pushing buttons, walking. They're going to get hit by some car sooner or later. Let's go back for a second because this came up and it's been a hot topic and maybe too hot for some reasons. And it has to do with Ike. Um, I did the interview with Phil Hellmuth about a week or two ago, right? And he mentioned that he thought Ike was taking advantage of the mask, that it blocked certain tells he might be able to give off. And that's one of the reasons why he had such a great year or two. And I did say, hey, Phil, I think Ike was doing kind of okay before the mask, And, he made his statement. And obviously, I don't play opposite Ike or have the experience that you guys have with Phil and Ike at the table. But can you share a bit about he actually used something he got from you and misinterpreted it and posted it on Twitter about your response about all that. Excuse me. Can you share your thoughts on all that?
Yeah. So there's a lot in there to dive into. First, let me start by
Yep.
saying that I think Isaac Haxton has the greatest poker mind that's ever existed. And this isn't some new thing. It's been that way for well over 10 years. He's succeeded at every single form of poker he's ever attempted. He dominated the highest stakes of heads up. He had a lot of success with mixed games, both live and online. He did well in Bobby's Room. Ultra high stakes cash games, PLO, both heads up and ring. And up until recently, tournaments were never his primary form of poker. And now he's finally like giving all his attention to tournaments, like really studying it. I think he is the best and most profitable tournament player right now. And I think it's so much disrespect from Phil to be like, oh, he's only succeeding now because of his mask. He succeeded wildly at every single form of poker at the absolute highest stakes against the absolute best competition. And a lot of it is just variance. He was playing a bunch of tournaments in 2017, 2018, and just wasn't running that well. And now he's running great. Like, he's definitely running above expectation, even for a great player like him. I also think it's grossly irresponsible for Phil to advocate for the banning of masks. It's an extremely legitimate health concern. COVID is very real and it's not going away anytime soon. I've spoken with Ike. He is incredibly well educated about COVID. He is well aware of the fact that there's a lot about long COVID that we don't know. A lot of people, probably including myself, are suffering from forms of long COVID, such as brain fog. Um, a lot of people still have trouble breathing even 6 months after having COVID. And we really don't know, will this last a lifetime? Will it last for decades? Will it go away after 6 months? So I think it's very reasonable to be, I was going to say afraid of it, but it's not even afraid. It's just taking the basic precaution of wearing a mask, which seems like a completely sensible thing for anyone to do.
Right.
Yeah, and I made some tweet, like my tweet response to Phil was a joke tweet about how, like, don't you see what's happening? Isaac wants us all to get long COVID, so we have brain fog. And, I made some joke about it. And Phil completely misinterpreted my tweet. He said he spoke to Daniel about how, like, he can prove that Isaac's tournament's results haven't always been the same. And, like, of course his results haven't always been the same. Like, one, he wasn't a big tournament player back then. Two, variance is a wildly big thing in tournaments. I think Phil Hellmuth has never really acknowledged that, like, luck is a big part of tournaments. He has some idea in his head that, like, because he has World Series bracelets, that, like, those are the tournaments he's good at and those are the prestigious ones and the other tournaments don't really matter. And it's like, no, you ran good in World Series tournaments, and because you ran good there, you decided to focus on them more. It's just all a bunch of nonsense.
No, I just wanted your feedback on that. Speaking of more tournaments and players, who are the players that you respect the most, if you're willing to talk a bit about it? The Chance Corner, the Alice Foxons, the players that have risen up around your same age and really think about the game deeply. Who do you fear playing against, or find it maybe not fear, but the toughest opponents? And besides Ike, and who do you like watching their game evolve in the past few years?
Yeah, so Isaac Haxton is definitely number one. Stephen Chidwick, I thought he was the best tournament player in the world for a while, and he's still absolutely top 3, top 5. He's definitely up there. Jason Kuhn and Nick Petrangelo. Daniel Dvoris and Tim Adams, I think, are 2 underrated players, and they're best friends. I'm sure they spend a lot of time studying together and working together on their games. They don't play a lot of the American tournaments because of Canadian tax reasons, so I think they might not be in the public eye as much, but they're absolutely top 10, if not top 5 players, incredibly talented as well.
Right. Do you really learn? What am I trying to ask? When you're at the table, do you still enjoy learning about the game? I mean, you're obviously ultra successful. Do you still learning about the game and growing your own game? Every moment's a chance for learning. Are you still curious?
Absolutely. My curiosity isn't nonstop like it used to be because I'm spending so much time on non-poker things.
Mm-hmm.
But when I'm in that poker sphere, when I'm around poker players, when I'm playing tournaments, when I watch a lot of training videos, people speak with such certainty over, like, you're not really supposed to check raise this spot this much, or this is a pure c-bet situation. And, like, time and time again, I'll be like, wow, he's really certain about that, but I don't know. And then I'll look it up and be like, oh, it's not actually 100%, it's 85%. And, like, maybe it's a small difference between 100% and 85%.
Mm-hmm.
But it's such a trap to fall into, to be certain about things that you're just wrong about. And when you have that mindset, you're just not open to how much there is for your poker, how much room there is for your poker game to improve.
Right.
And one thing I've done very well is, some people might hear me talk about some of these things. I do consider myself, a great poker player. But I'm incredibly modest in my understanding and my confidence about poker. I'm rarely the person who says I'm 100% sure that this situation works this way, because I've been gotten by the solvers many, many times. I have a general understanding of, okay, this is a high c-bet frequency spot. This is a decent hand to bluff with. But I understand that the intricacies of like fully understand a situation, you can go so deep, and the strategies are so complex that I need to always understand like there's so much more to learn, and I'm never anywhere remotely close to playing perfect poker or having a perfect understanding of the game.
Right. What do you think is our biggest obstacles and the positive things in our community that we need to grow? How can we grow stronger as a community and spread the game? This year seemed different in a lot of ways. Poker seemed to be back when I took Fox Sports and did interviews back in, God, 2008, 2009, the year Jamie won. Poker was people going ravenous crazy on all the sites, but it seemed like a different feeling at the World Series this year. Anything you think we need to do more to grow our community in a positive way right now? Any kind of thoughts?
Yeah, and there's kind of a subtle difference in between how you worded that I think is really important.
Okay.
Um, some people like Daniel Negreanu and Phil Hellmuth will grow the game at any cost. And they both have had kind of shady involvement with some of their sponsors and have been unwilling to speak out against their sponsors, even when there was massive theft and cheating. I think it's much more important to focus on leading the game into a positive direction than it is to versus growing it at all costs. I have massive respect for people who are willing to, put in the effort and speak out about game security and improve that. Certainly in online poker, we're facing an ever growing crisis of game security.
Yep.
And while it's not a new issue, it's been around for since the dawn of online poker. We are kind of getting to the point where many people are asking the question, like, does it even make sense for great players to play high stakes online because there is so much cheating? Um, I think a lot of other social issues are massively important. How women are treated at the table. Um, and it's better in some places than others. It's better at some stakes than others. My mindset is with almost anything that I do, I want it to be an inclusive space. I want everyone to feel safe and welcome, and I want their presence to be wanted. And unfortunately, that's not how it is in much of the poker world. A lot of people still see poker as this like seedy underground game where like, around their wife and family, they can't do whatever they want. But, after working all week and spending all week with their family, poker is the one place they can come to, you know, curse and drink and smoke and do all the things that they want to do. Um, and I think that mindset keeps a lot of people out of it, especially for like the really old school ones who are like poker's a man's game and I don't want
Mhm.
women around. Of course, you won't hear people saying it exactly that explicitly. Um, Again, I'm kind of rambling here, but yeah, the big takeaway I want you to take from this is that I think it's really important to make poker an inclusive space for everyone.
No, I spent a few days at the World Series on and off this past summer. I was really inspired. I even pitched an article that I might write eventually, interviewed some of the women in the game. When I went into the women's section, tournament room when the championship was going on, it was a whole different energy. They were cheering each other on. Not that I expect that to transfer over to just the males, guys that are just sitting there and doing their thing, but I just saw a camaraderie of buying each other wine and saying "great hand," and just as much more. It's like a party in that room, right? And so was kind of the final table for the women's championship. And I was really inspired by it and respect all the women that are stepping up, especially Poker Power, who their goal is to get 1 million women to play poker, right? I know some of those people involved there. They've been amazing. Some of the great um, women that are sharing comedy, like Caitlin, Nikki, and bringing some excitement to the game. It's refreshing in a way. I'm sure you've experienced that yourself, watching these women grow and the game. I think it's growing for them, and I'm hoping that men are more open to expressing themselves a little different at the table now when a woman sits down. I don't know. I'm a southern gentleman, and I've stood up for a couple of women and been shot down before, but I think that's the way it should be. It's fun. It looked fun in that room. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but it's definitely looked like a fun experience for all those ladies playing for the event.
Yeah, for sure. And especially for a newcomer, like that's the experience that they want
Yeah.
because poker rooms are scary. Like, I've been playing for 20 years, and sometimes I'll walk into a poker room that has like a weird list for a cash game, and I don't know what line I'm supposed to stand in, and people are bumping into each other. Um, if it's even a little bit intimidating to someone like me, of course it's going to be wildly intimidating to a new player. And you get scoffed at if you ask, the wrong floor man to put your name on the wrong list or whatever, and people are rude to you. So to have an environment like ladies' events where everyone's just like positive and welcoming, it's so important to grow the game. And I wish there was more of that. Nowadays at the table, you'll have all these people who like, so many of them don't even want to be there. They're not happy. They're not talking to people, especially at the higher stakes where it gets ultra competitive. It's just not the most welcoming environment to new players.
No, watching Bill Perkins put up an extra 50 grand at the lodge event, things like that was pretty cool. And I wrote about that, and it just made women excited. Oh, wow, it's something especially for us. So I hope it's going in that direction. And I encourage women to join these organizations out there that will help them learn to play and be comfortable in a poker room, like you said. So what's Justin Bonomo's ambitions in the game right now? You've been number one, I think, in most earnings, and you're only a couple million behind Kenny. You may have talked a bit about it, the run it once Q&A. What's your ambitions right now? Where do you want to go? You're at the top of your career. You're one of the best in the world and earn the most money. So where does Justin go from here?
There's basically only one thing left. I'm 38 years old, and you need to be 40 years old to be in the Poker Hall of Fame. And that's basically my only remaining goal. If I had to retire now, I would look back on my career and just be incredibly proud of what I've accomplished. I do have some just like inward goals that aren't really measurable. Just like areas of my game I would like to improve. So there's always room for growth. But in terms of long-term goals, just, yeah, Poker Hall of Fame.
I have to ask you this because it's something that I've seen from the great players when I've talked to them over the years. What what do you love about the game the most? Because it has to be love to be able to put this time in. Sure, you're making great money and it's all well and good, but the bottom line is you've got to love what you're doing or you're just going to be miserable in your life, no matter how much money you have. What drives you? And I'm curious what the spark was when you were 16 or 17 and saw a poker hand and go, I could love to do that. Where does that come from with you? And what's the most exciting part about the game for you regarding loving the game so much?
Yeah, and that's actually something I've struggled with recently because I certainly don't love the game quite as much as I used to.
Right.
In my game and our studying have suffered as a result. But yeah, when I first got into it, it was my everything. I think a lot of people watching this know that I got my start in Magic the Gathering.
Mhm.
I started playing when I was 8. When I was 14, I was playing junior tournaments all across the US. When I was 16, I went to Europe a couple times for pro tournaments. And then it was a couple older poker players, Brock Parker in particular, who started doing well at poker. I remember I watched him play 100, 200 limit hold'em online on WSEX, World Sports Exchange. And just like, wow, 45 seconds, you just won a $2,000 pot. And I just kind of like hoped that maybe one day I could win, 5% as much money as he was making. And to a 16-year-old, it was a dream come true to be able to succeed at online poker and make a living that way. I always had a problem with authority. I never really cared about high school. I thought I was smarter than all my teachers. Never wanted to work my butt off studying history so that I could, one day get a 9 to 5 job and get married and have kids and settle down at a young age. That basic life path never really made any sense to me. So I was always looking for a way to kind of go out on my own, and that was poker. Um, and it didn't take me long to start winning large amounts of money. By the time I finished high school, I already had a 6-figure bankroll. I was making more money than both my parents combined. So what's not to love about that is, an 18-year-old kid got to travel the world, became the first teenager ever to be on TV for poker, got to meet all these like really cool people who were their star and their field of poker. And like, it was the best minds in poker congregating, being pioneers of the game. It was new, it was exciting, it was uncharted territory, it was large sums of money. I was really incredibly good at it. What's not to love about it? How do you not become obsessed by something like that?
Was money a big driving force in that, or was there something else about the game that really intrigued you?
It's almost like two different axes because, like, yes, the money was important, but that wasn't what got my juices flowing. That wasn't what got me in my flow state. Just being the absolute best at something, working with other players who are also the best at it, just
Mhm.
competing at such a high level. That's what really got my flow state going.
Thank you for coming on the interview here with PokerOrg, and we appreciate your time.
Thanks.